Okay. All right. I'm going to spend the next half hour telling you about the PTA's research-based standards for family school partnerships and how they might help your school. So you might not know that the PTA was part of a working group several years ago that helped create the family engagement standards for SFUSD, which are largely based on the standards developed by the national PTA more than 20 years ago, but are tailored for our district. So that's great. There are actually lots and lots of school districts who have done the same thing. They've either adopted the standards or modified them to meet the needs of their own school districts. So this is a long-standing resource for a lot of best practices across the country. The National PTA began updating these standards that they created 20 years ago, 2 years ago, to incorporate research and best practices since 2008, which is the last time that they did an update, and to integrate the perspectives of families, educators, and youth, particularly those from historically marginalized communities, and to improve the usefulness of the standards across the education system. And so here we are. There's a lot of resources to support you, to support this, that you could explore with your school community at pta.org/standards. And there's an overview. Again, the links are here in the notes, and Melissa might put some of them in the chat while we're talking through this, but you'll see the overview. And what I have, well, I'll explain it a little bit more in a minute. So research shows, this probably won't be surprising to any of you, research shows that family engagement matters for student success. Students whose families are engaged are more likely to attend school, avoid discipline problems, achieve at higher levels, and graduate. Research also suggests that family engagement is equally as important as school leadership or a rigorous curriculum to predict school improvement. Did you know that? I don't think that I knew that a while ago. But how to engage families together in ways that reach all families and have a positive impact on student success? That's the question. And so that's what we're going to talk about. You have to, using these standards to guide the work at your school has to be a partnership effort. A PTA can't do this on their own, actually. You can't just have your meetings and work just with parents, but you can be, as parents and caregivers and just as members of the PTA, strong advocates to help it move along. You'll want to encourage leadership at your school to do some vision setting. And here are some of the questions that school leadership and staff should consider along with the families. You want to make sure that they're really invested in this, in doing this work. So in this vision setting, having the school leadership ask, why are we prioritizing family and school partnerships? And how does this connect to our values? What's exciting about this priority, thinking about the opportunities that it's creating, figuring out what a success looks like so we know what we're even aiming for. So what is possible? What kinds of things do we need to do differently to reach that success? And as they set goals, and all of you together set goals for family school partnerships, what are the most important things? And what will be different if we achieve these goals as a group? So here's how we're going to move through each of the standards. There are 6 standards. This could easily be overwhelming, so we're going to zoom in on tiny pieces within it. You can review this deck, of course, later. Again, as I said earlier, just pick, a couple of things that stand out to you. You can look at this later. You do not need to remember everything. You can look at this at your convenience. So we are going to, for each standard, I'm going to introduce the standard, and then I'll tell you what the 2 goals are for the PTA for that standard and the key indicators that show that you're on the right track. And then I'm going to zoom in to one indicator and explore a way that you might move that forward. So I've just come up with an example. So a very zoomed, because there's like 10 indicators for each of the standards, and we're not going to do that. Like, that's just much too in depth for something like this right now. We're just going to zoom in on one example of something you could do. Okay, so there are a few different tools at the link that you'll see in the deck. There's this rubric assessment tool. There's an overview of what the standards are. There are suggestions for ways that you might move these things forward in your schools. So those are like 3 separate documents, and I've I've kind of gathered them in one place for you. You can see the links later, but they're all kind of incorporated in the way we're going to move through this. So before we start going through this, I want to show you this tool. The PTA Center for Family Engagement created this rubric assessment tool that charts every indicator within a goal, within every standard, to help you see how you're doing at your school. You'll see the indicator here on the left column. And then each column after that progresses from early stage of progress towards doing pretty well, listing the criteria to help you know where your school falls. The stages are called emerging, progressing, which includes the criteria for emerging, and then excelling, which includes the criteria for the previous two columns as well. And you can refer to this document if you want to do this at your school. Again, it's linked in the notes, but if it's too overwhelming to be really useful right now in this session. So the other relevant resources I wanted to tell you about, we're not going to go through these really at all today, but if you go to that website that I just mentioned, that pta.org/standards, and you scroll all the way down the page, you'll see that you can click on each standard to find a lot of what we're going to talk about and a bunch of resources. And so here's what you'd find in the first standard. You'd see some policy links, some research links, and some practice, like a bunch of links on how you might take that particular standard in your area. Okay, now, my advice, if you want to take this on at your school, is to set one goal as a school. Work with the principal and the staff to set just one. Don't try to do everything everywhere all at once. Just choose one goal. And as we go through the standards, just jot down a couple of areas that resonate with you so you can bring up some initial thoughts when you start your school year next year. Okay, here's the first one. The first standard is welcome all families. And this is described as the school is treating families as valued partners in their child's education and facilitates a sense of belonging in the school community. That's the description of welcome all families. And within that, the first goal is to build a community of belonging. When families engage with the school and PTA, do they feel respected, understood, and connected to the school community? You'll see below here a list of school and PTA indicators that would show that you're moving towards building a community of belonging. Let you look at those. I'm not going to read through all of them. The second goal within this standard is to create an inclusive environment. Do the schools and PTA's efforts encourage engagement with and among the diversity of families in the community? Again, you'll see a list of indicators here. These are also, when you're thinking about goal setting for your PTA at the beginning of the year, this might be a thing you want to hone in on, one of these areas. Okay, so let's dive in to an example. So here is one of the indicators within goal 1 of the first standard, welcome all families. And I'm going to show you. So this indicator is learn about families and foster respectful attitudes. You'll see in the emerging, progressing, excelling columns here, for instance, if you are emerging, kind of the beginning stages, you're encouraging all staff to build upon family strengths and to see families as integral partners in their child's education. That's emerging. It's a good thing to do, but it's very early stage. Now, if you're moving into the progressing area, so you're kind of mid-range, you're modeling asset-based thinking. So asset-based thinking about the positives, what students are bringing, what families are bringing that are really positive and good to the school, to the work of themselves, what is good, as opposed to deficit-based thinking, which is all these disadvantages, not thinking about that, thinking about the positive things that they bring and to the learning experience. So model asset-based thinking about students and families through asset-based language, attitude, and leader actions that center the intrinsic value of all families as partners in their child's education. If you're in the excelling example, you're interrupting deficit and bias language and action about students and families among school leadership and staff. So you're moving from encouraging to modeling to interrupting. So some ways, just thinking about this, some possible actions your PTA could take if this was the indicator they wanted to focus on. You could hold a workshop about asset-based thinking. What is it? Hold a workshop about it for families and staff, because it's a different way of thinking, maybe different from how a lot of us grew up thinking and hearing language around us and our families. You could also use a PTA meeting or a school site council meeting to have groups of people brainstorm lists of the reasons why strong partnerships with families are good for students in the school and post those in a place where all can see them. I can tell you from experience, I've talked to teachers who have said, oh, I don't like working with families because I had a really bad experience with parents once. So this could interrupt that kind of thinking by saying, well, why would we want strong partnerships? Because when you name it and put it out there, it starts to help people shift their thinking a little bit. So maybe you take some time to brainstorm some lists. Okay. And then this is a list. Again, you're going to see this for every single one of the standards, but I'm not going to talk through it. It's just there for you to refer to later. This is a list of other things that you could do that align with this standard. Ideas. Okay, the next standard is communicating effectively. What this standard is about is that the school is supporting staff to engage in proactive, timely, and two-way communication so that all families can easily understand and contribute to their child's educational experience. Goal 1 in this standard is exchange information between school and families. Are families able to receive and share information in culturally and linguistically sustaining ways? So are you translating the materials that you're sending? Is your school translating the materials they're sending out to families? Are they culturally humble and relevant ways that they're working? So here are some indicators that you can look through. Give you a second to glance through those. You can look at these later also. The second goal is facilitating parent-teacher communication. Does the school and PTA promote communication between families and teachers? And here's a list of indicators that might be happening. Now, as we go to honing in. So here is an indicator within goal 1 of the second standard. And I'll admit that I chose this one because I think it's something the school district could do better, a lot better in, particularly in the report back part of this, because I think it's really respectful and valuable for families to know that the time that they took to provide their input was worth it, that it actually resulted in something. It didn't fall on deaf ears. It wasn't just the action that the school district or a school did, wasn't just window dressing or checking a box. When you report back the impact of what feedback did, it says to the people who gave you the feedback, what you have to say matters, and it can help us do better. Thank you for sharing. Here's what happened because you shared. Please share again in the future. That's the message you share when you report back to families. So again, I think our district could use encouragement in that area, and I think a lot of our schools could too. So here is our emerging and progressing and excelling examples of criteria that show that you're in one of those different levels. And some actions that I have here are maybe you work in partnership with a school site council, your ELAC, or other affinity groups at your school to host a community meeting to ask families for their input on a few specific areas or ask them what their priorities are for their child. You could also send surveys to people who can't attend the actual meeting. And then you could convene parents, staff, and students to review the results and then make recommendations to all of those different groups for incorporation into your SIPSA. So that is the document that your school site council is creating every year. It's called the School Plan for Student Achievement. And that is your school is setting goals for itself to support its students and the different subgroups of students based on data and research and what they think will help. And so that you could make recommendations that those priorities get included and incorporated into your SIPSA or wherever else that it's appropriate. Maybe it's into your PTA's goals. And once plans are made, share back with families what happened as a result of them sharing their input and invite them to continue sharing because you're showing them that you're going to use it. All right, again, some other ideas of things you can do. All right, our third standard is supporting student success. This one is about the school building the capacity of families and educators to continuously collaborate to support students' academic, social, and emotional learning. The first goal for this standard is teaming up for student success. Are families, students, and educators on the same page about how students are progressing? You can see some of the indicators here. So you're building some understanding about how students are doing. The second goal is support learning by engaging families. Are families valued partners in their children's learning at home and at school? And there's some indicators below. Again, we go to our rubric, and this is an indicator within goal 1 of that 3rd standard. And that indicator is support educators to partner with families and students to set social, emotional, and academic goals. So again, if we're looking at emerging, communicate to staff the importance of partnering with families and students to set these goals. So communicating to them, you're not requiring anything, you're communicating, there's an importance to it, right? And then when you move to the middle, the progressing, that might look like you're providing teachers with the data that they need and the time that they need to engage in goal setting conversations with families. So you're actually making the space and giving a little bit of the room and support so that teachers can have those conversations with families. And then as you move into the excelling, articulating and monitoring progress towards school-wide goals for collaborative goal setting. There's other things in here you can see that are even more proactive than just providing teachers with data, right? So it's just another level. It's leveling up over and over with each of these different columns. So some possible actions here, if you're supporting student success and specifically supporting educators to partner with families, what about having student-led conferences during your parent-teacher conference week that helps students own and lead their learning, as well as self-advocate for what they need? And in those meetings, families, teachers, and students set social, emotional, and academic goals together. Schools who do student-led conferences have seen a lot of success in those, in the engagement of the students, but also the families, and hearing directly from their students about how they're doing and awareness there, and what do we want to have together. Just, it has everybody participate in a really, really useful and productive way and meaningful way. And then the other thing you could do related to that is suggest ways that small education team, this family, teacher, student, could regularly check in on progress, identifying ways to support the student to meet those goals that you all set together in that student-led conference. Again, here are some other suggestions of things that you can do. You can check these out later if you're looking for ideas for this standard, if that's a standard that resonates with your PTA or your school. And then our 4th standard is speak up for every child. And then this goal, the school affirms, or this standard, the school affirms family and student expertise and advocacy so that all students are treated fairly and have access to relationships and opportunities that will support their success. The first goal in this standard is to navigate the school system. Are families knowledgeable and able to raise questions or concerns about their child's educational experience? Here are some of the indicators below for schools and PTAs. And then the second goal within this standard is to address inequitable outcomes and access. Does the school and PTA remove barriers for families to be advocates for and with students, particularly those who are most marginalized? And there's the indicators below. And here's our zooming in. This is an indicator within goal 1 of the 4th standard, encouraging community and leadership among historically underrepresented groups. So you can see this emerging as identifying groups. That's a first step. Like the middle level progressing is sending targeted and differentiated communications to learn. And then the last one, if you're excelling, the criteria here would be that you're following up to share opportunities for leadership, you're learning, right? So you're moving from identifying to trying to outreach and then to actually doing something about it. Here's some suggested actions related to this particular indicator. You could reach out to families from underrepresented groups, families whose students have disabilities, maybe they're families who are ELAC families, so English as a second language, English learners. Ask how they think the PTA could be improved, especially to better meet the needs of families like theirs. You could invite them to lead some of the improvement efforts in your PTA and work alongside them in support. And then you could also make sure that your PTA's nominating committee in the spring is specifically reaching out to members of these communities in efforts to make sure that the PTA is supporting all students and all families. And hopefully you've laid the groundwork so that they won't feel like it's a performative or token sort of a seat, but that they feel valued and a part of the PTA. They feel like they belong there because of the work that you're doing, building up to inviting them to be part of your leadership. Here's again a list of things that you can do. And then moving on to our 5th standard, which is share power. This standard is where the school partners with families and decisions that affect children and families, and together as a team, inform, influence, and create policies, practices, and programs. The first goal in this standard is to strengthen the family's voice in shared decision-making. Are families partners in making decisions that affect their children at school and in the community? You can here see these indicators. The second goal is to build families' connections. Do families have a strong, broad-based organization that offers regular opportunities to develop relationships and raise concerns with school leaders, public officials, and business and community leaders? Okay, and here's our zooming in. This is a little bit like the adage you've probably heard is not about us without us. A lot of us have a hard time giving up power and control, especially if it's traditionally been given to us. So let's look at this indicator, which is identifying and remedying power imbalances. So you see the progression here from emerging, progressing, excelling. This is informally asking families about their experiences and concerns. So informally, and then maybe in the middle, you're conducting family surveys to understand all of that. Maybe you're training staff. And then in the last column, maybe you're conducting focus groups. You're doing much more close and personal outreach to gather input on their experiences and their concerns they might have around decision making. You could audit your school policies and practices. See the other examples here within this indicator, some criteria. So here's possible action you could take if this is a standard that resonates with you. You could work with the school site council to hold community meetings that specifically ask families about their priorities, a little bit like we were just talking about in another standard. Look at data together to identify where support is needed, and then invite families to make recommendations on which actions should be included in the SIPSAs. So inviting families to make those actions, and then a different idea could be to have working sessions with families to evaluate what common practices in the school exclude or silence families, and then work together to propose alternate practices. So if there is just a standard, oh, it's faster and easier this way, the principal just does this, or the teachers just do this, or even the PTA just does this, it's just sort of normal. If you have a chance to do a bit of an audit, what are some really regular things we do that actually end up maybe unintentionally, but might be intentionally silencing families because it makes it messier, or it makes it a little less streamlined. It takes more time, right? I think that's often where we see challenges in sharing power is like, oh, it's so much time to do that. We just don't have that time. But really, you have to make the time, because if these are your goals and you want to include everyone, you actually have to make the time. And so you might be, again, unintentionally or intentionally silencing families by some of those regular practices. Here's some ideas you can look at later. And then moving on to the last standard, which is collaborate with community. And in this standard, the school collaborates with community organizations and members to connect students, families, and staff to expanded learning opportunities, community services, and civic participation. The first goal is to build a strong foundation for community partnerships. Does the school and PTA have a plan for when and how to engage community partners? The second goal is to connect the school with community partners. Do family and school leaders work closely with community organizations, businesses, and institutions of higher education? So I chose this one, this indicator, because it aligns really well with a PTA priority, which is to build community schools, which is there's a very specific model to community schools, but it includes a lot of what's listed here in this indicator. And again, it's a priority for the PTA. And so here, addressing student and family basic needs through community resources. There's the variety, the span across the different levels of doing this, creating a guidance document that outlines partners, identifying personnel on staff that are tasked with building. So there's somebody who's in charge of building relationships and partnerships. And then maybe your more advanced version of this is actually inviting community partners to have a physical presence on your site. Right? We have some community schools, for instance, who have dental clinics, or they might have an area where families can go to look for job resources. Maybe there are wellness, more than the standard wellness clinics that we have at a lot of our school sites. Maybe they have something even more than that is meeting the specific needs of your community. So here's a possible action, and that is designate a PTA leader who can collaborate with a staff member to identify a list of community-based organizations. We sometimes our acronym for that is CBOs, that can meet the basic needs that are experienced by your community. And then invite these CBOs to come speak at your PTA meeting so that families learn about their services if they're not already aware of them. And then make a list of relevant CBOs easily available to your community and determine if there's a way to establish a more formal partnership with the school. So that is one way you could take that again, really lined up well with a PTA priority. And there's your ideas for things you can do. And then finally, so now what? Think back to my suggestion at the beginning of this, like what is one goal you can set this year to work on with school leadership and staff? So think about what resonated the most with you. And maybe we've got just a couple minutes left here. Does anybody want to share were any particular standards or goals or indicators that really resonated with you that you think are just interesting or that you would like to consider bringing up to your PTA or your school site in the fall? Feel free to raise your hand or type in the chat. BVH, so Buena Vista Horace Mann is a great example of a community school with job, economic training, and housing resources. Absolutely. They're a great example. Thank you for sharing that. And so that's also a great, if that was something that your school is interested in, you don't really have a lot of a community school model at your school, BVHM is, reach out to Bernice. She can give you some tips. Communication resonated with me. With a new admin and new PTSA, we need good communication models. Yep. You are not alone. I know a lot of PTAs face that. Anything else that resonates with people?
Hi.
Hi.
I'm a incoming and I'm new at this. The reason why I joined is and plus my son started virtual at 9th grade in the 2021, and now he's a senior. And I started virtual too as a parent at 2021, and we did in person at 2020. Last year I called myself a freshman parent. The reason why I joined is that I just want to help the kids of the class of 2024 to have a good senior year and bring back the community in person of all, all different background, diverse background, and bring that in there and make it strong.
Thank you for sharing. Good luck as you enter this new job, trying to bring your community together. I hope it goes well. I hope some of this is helpful in figuring that out. Any other comments before we close up, or questions that you might have about everything that I just talked about? We'll send the links, but do you have any questions before we move on?
It's a quick question for you. So I thought that came to mind, Michelle, in terms of, getting engagement, right? I mean, a lot of parents sort of don't get involved, or they certainly don't get involved in the PTA.
Yeah.
Are there sort of outreach programs? I'm thinking about, maybe we can sponsor parents to join up with the PTA even though they can't afford it, or sort of try to make it easier in some way. You talked about hybrid meetings that makes things more accessible.
Absolutely. You can definitely, to answer to sponsoring memberships, you absolutely can do that. There's a few ways that people can write in the chat if they've done it in their own PTAs, but the things I've seen is that you can ask a local business to sponsor members and just say if they'll give, $200, that'll sponsor, 20 members or something like that. And then you just say, if you want to be sponsored, if you would like a scholarship, for instance, to pay for your PTA membership, just, send an email to the principal or whatever feels like a trusted source within your school. You can do something like that. You could also, when you're soliciting memberships at the beginning of the year, say, if you would like to donate any extra funds to cover other members who aren't able to pay for their membership, then please do it. Just make room for that on a form. You can do that too. So that's a way to pay for the membership. There are lots of different things you can do with the hybrid meetings with, as I was saying in the last session, ways to outreach and find out what are the barriers for people to participate. That's a big thing. And it does take time to figure out what the barriers are. It means you have to ask people and talk to them. And so that you have to get a little creative with, especially if you're at the high school level. I see you're at Wallenberg. So, but finding out what the barriers are for people to coming. We also want to let you know, because we're going to be in a minute going into breakout sessions. There is a session on tip share. It's idea and tip sharing for committee chairs. It's not a formal presentation, but there is a kind of a guide and some prompts to move through that that section. If there's anybody who wants to go to that, there'll be some talking about recruiting volunteers and things like that in that session. And of course, if you can't go, we'll send you the document after the fact, so you can look at the resources that are listed there and see what ideas the people in that group came up with. But that's probably to get started. But if you have other ideas, you're at the beginning, like please reach out to us or post on the president's listserv or whatever listserv you are on. And people can brainstorm with you, because there are a lot of ideas, good ideas across the PTAs in this district. And they're sharing all the time on those listservs. So that's a really great resource for you as you get into the school year. We'll get those set up sometime in July.
That sounds good. That was going to be my other question, sort of how do we find out what other people have done? But
yeah, that'll be a great place, in these breakout sessions. And also if you all want some more, we can also hold like those 411 Wednesdays to, if somebody says, I'd really like ideas on this particular thing, we can just hold a meeting that is just everybody come together and let's talk about it. People share ideas. I need ideas. Help me with this, or let's bring all the high school presidents together to talk about what their specific challenges are as high school PTA presidents. We can arrange those kinds of meetings for you all too. So there'll be lots of ways. And if you ever feel lost or confused, just reach out to somebody on our district board and we'll help you. Okay, any final questions, or shall we call the end of this one? Okay, I'm